Hello, flight instructors and NAFI members. John Niehaus, Director of Program Development for the National Association of Flight Instructors, welcoming you back to another episode of the NAFI More Right Rudder Podcast, the podcast for flight instructors on the go. And I just want to do a quick reminder, if you didn't know already, that listeners to this podcast actually get a discount to a NAFI membership, both joins and renewals. If you use the code POD49, Papa Oscar Delta 49, you can get $10 off your membership. We appreciate you listening. We hope you have subscribed to the podcast. Maybe tell your friends. We'd love to get a little bit more listenership if we could, but every little bit helps. So thank you for that. And today I'm very grateful for our guest here at the podcast, and it is Jeff Jorgenson. Now, Jeff is the founder of Open Air Flight Club, and Open Air Flight Club is also a book by the same name, and it's award-winning. It won the 2019 Minnesota Aviation Hall of Fame Award. He's been a CFI since 2009 and considers himself an aviation ambassador, which is what Open Air Flight Club is all about. Now, if you want more information on this, we'll put the link to his website in the podcast notes. Go take a look at it. It is all about an introduction to aviation and aviation facts and things like that. So I'm sure he'd appreciate you take a look at that. Jeff, welcome.
Hi. Hey, John. How you doing? Today, I want to talk a little bit about what happens after a crash, right? So you guys did and I was inspired by a video you guys did a little while back where you talked about, how to crash an airplane. And I thought that was really cool. And I really liked that, and it kind of piqued my interest because I had spoke to this back in April 17th of 2017. I am a survivor of a gyroplane crash, and so what happens after that was, as a flight instructor going through that experience, the aftermath was something that I taught all about the NTSB and the NASA form, and but when you're actually experiencing it, it was much different than I expected, I guess.
The Metro Live that you're referencing was one back in November of 23. And that's how long we've been talking about this. I'm sorry it took so long to get you on the show. But I think it's a credible topic because, we've got a couple things that happen here. The first is, like you said, we sort of have this rote memorization of, well, what are we supposed to do? But just like anything else bad, we all sort of think, it's not going to happen to me. It's going to happen to the next guy. I don't need to know this. It's kind of like light gun signals, right? Like, you know them for the test, and then you're just like, nah, it's never going to happen. And so, to have an experience like you did, that's nobody can really truly be prepared for that, right?
Correct. And so, preparedness looks different in the real world than it does when you're teaching it.
Yeah. So let's get into the story. Tell me what happened.
So I was in a fixed wing. I was on a fixed wing mission. I was flying a 172 with a cinematographer, and we had a route that we had planned through central Iowa. We were filming some aftermath of tornadoes that had gone through central Iowa around that time, and some other storm damage and that sort of thing. And we stopped in Knoxville, Iowa, just for lunch and to take a break and that sort of thing. And when we were there, the owner of this gyroplane, I'd known him for quite some time. They built this beautiful xenon gyrocopter or gyroplane, and just a gorgeous machine. And he'd been flying around. He'd flown over 200 hours. You got to have your initial 40, and then he's flown over 200 hours in this thing by this point. And he had just landed with his son. His son got out, went into the bathroom, and was going to go home or whatever. And he's like, "Hey, you want to go for a ride?" And I said, "Man, I'd love to, but I've got the cinematography. We're on this photography mission. I can't really this time, but I'll take a rain check." And my cinematographer, he heard this. He's like, no, go do it. We'll film it. I'm like, oh, cool. So I'm all in. So I get a ride for the first time in my life in a gyrocopter. And so first of all, the thing, I get in it, he starts it up and we're taxiing. He's going through his checklist. And I can see everywhere. There's windows on top. There's windows on the floor, both sides, the windscreen. I can see in every direction. The view was amazing. It was like almost being like in a glass bubble. It was incredible. And, so then there's like a 2-minute spool up time to get the rotors up to speed for you to take off. And then we do our takeoff roll and we're taking off. And I'm filming the thing and I'm having a blast. And we heard a noise. We get up to about 500 feet and we heard a noise and it sounds different. I can't really describe it differently. It just sounded different. And he looked at me and he goes, we're losing power. And I thought, well, that's not good. And then it dawned on me, I don't know anything about a gyrocopter. Right? I'm sitting, I'm a flight instructor, but all the gauges are different, all the speeds are different, all the instrumentation, and I don't know anything about what's going on here. I'm like, well, we're over some pretty flat land. We're still over the runway, right? So I mean, I'm not terrified yet, but your brain goes into fast forward, fight or flight mode, and so I'm in fast forward thinking about all the what ifs. And I got to pick up my daughter from school at 3:00 and, it's lunchtime now, but I got plenty of time. But then what happens if they crash and I don't make that? And all these things are going on. And then, we're starting to fall and it's accelerating. Like we're falling faster than we should be. And I'm like, so I turned off my phone. I wish I'd have kept recording because that would have been really neat to have that video, but I'm glad I didn't because I needed to be hands-on in the situation,
Yeah.
And so we're coming down and I'm pointing out there's a field to our right. And I'm like, okay, if we could try to hit that field, it's a flat field. There's, we'll be good. And he's like, I don't think I have enough airspeed to maneuver. So we kind of forced the nose over. It's similar to an airplane, I think, in that, it can stall. So he pushed the nose over. We start falling a little faster, but we're speeding up a little bit. And he starts gaining a little bit of controllability, but not enough. And right directly in front of us are power lines. And that wasn't that warm, fuzzy feeling that I can see everything. And I didn't want to block that. I didn't want to see that anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm coming down. I'm thinking, I don't know what happens when an aircraft hits power lines. I've heard about it, crop dusters and that sort of thing doing it, but I don't know what happens to a pilot. So, I'm about to find out. Turns out when you go through power lines, nothing happens to a pilot. I didn't feel a thing, right? Knock on wood. We broke the power line and came down, and we had a pretty forced landing in the ditch. And rolled, and then the rotors were going around, so they hit, and then we kind of roll over on the pilot side. And so, no, I'm sorry, we rolled over onto my side. I was on the passenger side, and so he's hanging above me, and I smell fuel. So we're leaking fuel. We had quite a bit of fuel, so we're leaking fuel, and then I smell smoke, and that wasn't that, again, warm, fuzzy feeling, right? So that wasn't
right.
So I'm like, okay, so now I'm doing a self-assessment. We came down pretty hard, so I'm like, okay, am I okay? Is anything broken? Am I bleeding anywhere? Anything like that? And I'm like, okay, I think I'm okay. And adrenaline's going. He's like, I can't get out of my seatbelt. Well, he's hanging on it. So I lifted him up, and he undid his seatbelt, and then he kind of came down on top of me, and then he stood up and got his door open, and then he got out, and I said, wait, I have some EMG training from the past, and I know if there are down power lines, you don't want to jump close to the end of that because they have like a 10-foot radius that they can still zap you. So the power lines were kind of away from it. They were maybe 20 feet to, I'll just say, to our left. And so he kind of jumped off into the grass away from that and climbed up the hill and up onto a gravel road then. So we were in a ditch between the power lines and the gravel road. And so I stood up and kind of did the same assessment and got out, and I climbed out and went over there. And later, I found out 2 people helped us open the door and pull us out. And I don't remember that. I don't remember seeing them. I have no idea that there were 2 people there that had seen the crash and helped us out. And I don't remember any of that at all. Wow. It's just amazing how your brain reacts in that sort of moment, and the things that we remember. But there's pictures of us standing with the people and that they were there. So, I have no recollection of it. And, was that maybe a head concussion or something? I was pretty sure that I was okay. And that's something I want to talk about here is, what happens after the crash. So you have any questions for me as far as the event and what happened at this point?
It's interesting because, and I don't want to get into this because it's a whole different topic, but, we as instructors always teach, engine failure on takeoff and stuff like that. And, there's the whole impossible turn conversation and everything else. But one of the things that I always stressed with my students, and I think most do, is that, your brain goes into a certain amount of denial at first, right? Oh, this isn't happening. Everything's fine. And then
right.
Right. And then you get into this, okay, it's not fine. And then like you said, you start thinking about, okay, well, what happens to my daughter? What happens to this? What happens to that? And all of that is critical time, And so for everyone who thinks that like, oh, there's, Chuck Yeager could do it. Why can't I do it? And I'm not saying people can or can't, because again, I don't want to get into the impossible turn discussion, but you've got to remember how much is wasted in your brain just realizing and catching up to the fact that something bad's about to happen.
And you're absolutely right. And one of the things also, you talk about being a CFI and teaching, accident procedures, if you will, or, forced landing procedures. I teach my students routinely all the time. Okay, crack a door open before you land in case it gets jammed shut. But do you think I did that? Nope, I didn't. And in our case, we rolled over onto my side. Even if I had, I still wouldn't have been able to get out of it. But as one of the things that I thought about afterwards, it's like, I never did that. I teach it all the time, but I had so many things, never even thought about it. Never did it, never crossed my mind. And it was like one of those like disappointing and little revelation. It's like, maybe I don't stress that enough. Maybe I should incorporate that a little differently. But also, is it that important? I don't know. And just little stuff like that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So many things go through your mind. All the things that are going to happen or the consequences of having an accident and all the things that's going to cost. It just cascades, right? At least for me, it cascaded all the way down. Like the whole rest of my day literally flashed before my eyes, and I was trying to figure all kinds of problems out that this would create. And I wasn't solving the problem at hand, that I am inevitably literally in the middle of getting ready to crash in a gyroplane. And it may have been a little different for me too, because I wasn't the pilot. I was merely a passenger.
So you were along for the ride.
So that I make that, clear. And him and I were very clear on that too. That I'd never been in a gyroplane before, and he was really excited to be given a CFI a ride, and he's something he'd never flown before. So we were very, very clear on that when they started, right? So there was no misperception that I was doing a poor job as a CFI because I wasn't handling it. He knew I knew nothing.
Right. So, I think that's an important distinction to make, because there's a lot of assumptions that people make when there is a CFI on board. And I believe that's part of what you're going to reference as well as we.
You and I have talked about that quite a bit. So thanks for the lead.
Yeah. So why don't you continue? So what happened? So 2 people helped you out, which you don't remember. And at least you had enough sort of forethought to consider the power lines, because that would be an easy thing to forget in the heat of the moment. How close were the power lines actually to you guys?
So we came through, the blades hit and broke the power line. So not the actual aircraft itself. And the one line fell down, and it was kind of by the pole, which is probably, I don't know, 25, 30 feet from us on one side. and the other one was probably about 20 feet from us on the other side. So when they're taut, so when they broke, they kind of, they recoil back.
Yeah.
They were quite a ways from us. I don't know that it always happens that way.
Oh, sure.
I don't go through power lines very often. First time, hopefully I don't do it again. But that was our experience from that.
Sure.
And so I'm looking at some quick notes here. Crack the doors, best place to land. Shut off the fuel before you come down. Yeah, we didn't do any of that. But after we smelled fuel and then smelled smoke, we shut off the engine, we shut off the fuel, and and then when we were egressing. So we did do that before we egressed the aircraft. Some statistics. So I did some research after this, and I don't think it's changed significantly. But at the time in 2017, from the NTSB reports, causes of crashes are 26% mechanical failure, 64% human error, and 10% other factors like hitting a deer on a runway or birds and that sort of thing. And so I thought that was really interesting that 64% of aircraft accidents are human error,
right?
And that includes weather. Just in that disclosure, but only 26% are mechanical failure. So we plan for a lot of mechanical failure scenarios, but it's only a quarter of the time, right? And so it's just something to be aware of. So then what happens after the crash? So we've exited the aircraft now. We're standing on the road, and there's two people there that have pulled us out, and the police car comes screaming down this gravel road and pulls up and slides in the gravel, and comes out, and he's like, okay, are you guys okay? And I'm like, yeah. Is there anybody else in the aircraft? No. And so they get out and they're kind of assessing. They're like, okay, the ambulance on the way, they're right behind me. And so he's looking around. He goes, so is this still the airport?
Oh, geez.
And I'm like, no. I'm pretty sure we've made it off airport grounds now, and we're next to a road. So this is probably, because of utility lines, a public right of way,
yeah,
or that sort of thing, next to a road. And so he's like, I don't have any idea who has jurisdiction over an aircraft accident. And I'm like, well, I mean, I don't know that it's illegal to crash an airplane, so I don't know what kind of jurisdiction you need. But the number one term that I heard, he goes, do I need to call the FFA?
Oh,
and I said,
Lord.
no, we didn't hit any animals on our way down. So even on adrenaline, I do a lot of dad jokes and humor. So I learned
I do the same thing. Yeah.
But I don't know if that works in my favor. But so then the ambulance shows up and the fire. So I don't remember which order now because it all happened so fast. But the ambulance and the fire truck showed up virtually at the same time. I don't remember which one was first or not. The fire truck pulls up and they've got a bunch of guys bailing out and donning all their stuff in there. They can't put out the fire yet until the utility company, which they were waiting on, shuts off the electricity first because they don't want to get electrocuted.
Right.
Watching this thing burn, and they're kind of all geared up and ready for it, but they're waiting for the all clear before they can do anything. I thought that was interesting. I never thought about that either. And so the police officer's asking me all kinds of questions. Who do you call? And I'm like, okay, well, there's the NTSB. If there's an accident, we need to call them. I have the number to the local FAA, the FSDO. And this was a weekday, it's around lunchtime. So we called the FSDO and informed them, let them know. And they, I had in the phone, so he talked to them for the most part. And I know he got some direction from them and what he was going to do. But then the pilot, real good friend of mine, I'm not going to use his name because I didn't contact him to ask permission ahead of time. So I apologize for that. But
no, that's okay.
So he called his insurance company. He's like, so I was just in an accident. Like, what do I need to do? And so he's talking to his insurance company. And then I get a phone call. It was my publisher. So I had literally just published a book and it was getting ready to launch that day.
Wow. That
And
day?
so my publisher calls me and he says, "Hey, you got a few minutes?" I said, I really don't. I just crashed in a gyroplane. Can I give you a call back a little later?" He's like, "Wait, what?" He's like, "Yeah. I'll call me back later." And then,
Well,
so
hey,
then,
hang on a second. I got a semi-serious but mostly joking question. Does surviving an airplane crash sell more books or less?
I mean,
Did
so
they did they use it for any kind of publicity at the end of the day?
I'll get to that in a minute. But yes, that's a
Okay.
great question, and it definitely played a role. Uh,
Interesting.
so then, we're talking about insurance claims, legalities. So an important notice after the crash, right? Get a notebook, text yourself on your phone, find someone to take some notes, find out what the weather conditions are, what the temperature is, whether it's sunny, partly cloudy, all this kind of stuff, because you're not going to get the NTS paperwork for a couple of weeks. And once they've done their preliminary, then they give you a bunch of paperwork to fill out, and they ask all this information about what was the wind speed and direction, what was the temperature outside, was it cloudy or partly cloudy, and we literally had to go back and look it up. We didn't remember any of that.
Right. Yeah.
So if you're ever in an aircraft accident, write down as many details about the weather and your flight planning and all this, because it's going to play a role in the paperwork later. So then we're going through this, and the utility company shows up, and they shut off the power, made sure that was all secure, went and tested it, and then the fire department, then they put out the fire, and the ambulance comes up to the ambulance people. Then they had the gurney out, and they wheeled it over to me, and I'm standing there talking to the officer and a bunch of other people, all this going on. They said, "Hey, sit down on this." So I sit down, and they said, "Okay, we need you to, we want you to go to the hospital with us." And I go, I think I'm fine, and I got to go get my daughter at 3, right? So now it's probably at 1:00, and they're like, "Well, we strongly urge you to go to the hospital." And I'm like, "I've done kind of a self-assessment. I think I'm okay. And I'm not bleeding. Nothing's broken. My back feels fine. Now, am I hopped up on adrenaline? Could I possibly hurt? I don't think so, but I think that's always a possibility, right? How much don't you know because you're on adrenaline? You think you're okay, but maybe you're not. Maybe your mind is masking all that at the moment."
Right.
And
Internal bleeding or
they handed
something.
me a form. They said, "We need you to sign this." And it's big bold letters of the cross that says refusal of care form. So I'm like, well, what does that mean if I refuse care? Like, does that mean that it's not covered under my insurance if I find out I'm hurt and I go and see him later? Like, what are the implications of that? And it's, from what I can tell, and maybe every state's different, I don't even know, but the laws in Iowa is they are protecting themselves so that I can't come back on them later and say, I wanted them to take me to the hospital, but they wouldn't do it.
Right.
They didn't, you know what I mean? They told me I was fine and they didn't take me. So they're just making sure that there's very clear communication that they made every effort to take me to the hospital and I refused them. So that's what that means. As far as, if you're hurt and it's still covered, it's just a protection from there, the best I can tell from all the people I've talked to afterward about that. But it was just really interesting. And so you asked, and this, I'm going to answer your question now. You asked about how well does an aircraft accident sell a book? So remember, I had a cinematographer filming this. So my aircraft accident, that gyroplane accident, was already on social media at this point. He had already uploaded the video to his to the media, his media connections, and I was already on social media. I'm still on scene. I'm still signing refusal care forms. The firefighters are fighting the fire, and I'm on social media, and my mom calls me. Because the cinematographer is a friend of mine, so we have a lot of common Facebook, friends, and my mom is one of them. She called me. She's like, "Is that you on the news?"
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, I'm kind of still here. Can I call you back? And so, um, that was I don't like if you do have a cinematographer, I would have a clear expectation that if something does occur, that they delay that sometime, 15, 20 minutes, half hour, an hour, a week, something, so that it doesn't hit the media while you're still on scene in the middle of it.
Right. Yeah.
Just FYI. So within the first 24 hours, I made the Associated Press. I was in, as far as I could tell, my video or the video of the accident was in over 100 different news stories that day.
Now, out of curiosity, did you have any negative effects of that video going out before an NTSB assessment? Was there any pushback on, well, why did this get out before we had a chance to look
No,
at the scene or any of that?
no, and there was, first of all, there was no really foul play in the accident, right? And and there were no legal charges or anything. So the pilot, from what I could tell, pretty much did everything to the best of his ability,
Sure.
and handled it. So yeah, so there was nothing. Could there be? Yeah, I mean that's a consideration, right? When you hit the news, at that point, just assume everybody knows everything that got put out there. I wish I had tied the book to that media when he's uploaded that. Like that would have been right genius. That would have been a marketing savior. I mean, that's probably not the right word, but it would have really intensified the marketing around the book being tied to that. I did a lot of secondary marketing where I actually spoke at Oshkosh because this April 17th, Oshkosh of 2017, I spoke at the NAFI tent. And fortunately, it was right before John and Martha King spoke. So
That's a tough spot.
I would not have wanted to speak after them because that would have been horrible.
Yeah.
They're amazing speakers and just so dynamic. They're great people. And so this is the kind of the slideshow that I did there. So, the ambulance shows up, the police shows up, the fire truck shows up, and they're all asking you questions. They're all doing things. And
So let's talk about the scene a little bit. So you've got, I'm assuming the two people that helped you guys out are probably the ones that called the 911 would be my guess.
I
Or
didn't
did they
make
just happen to see you?
so my pilot called his insurance company. It was the first phone number that he called. I think one of the two guys that helped us out had called 911,
Yeah.
or it may have been somebody at the airport or my cinematographer that had seen it, because they came down from the airport and apparently they did like Dukes of Hazzard style, launched over a hill and all four tires of the car went out, and they came over and they didn't care because they thought that they were going to be removing bodies out of a burning aircraft. Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you guys were lucky that they weren't.
Right. Absolutely.
So, okay. So somehow 911 gets called, which is good. Of course, the police, ambulance, fire all show up. Are you finding at this point that there's a crowd of people showing up, or are you kind of in a remote enough area where it's just you and the emergency medical stuff?
Yeah, we were not visible to most of the general public because we're kind of down in not really a ravine, but it's a low-lying area next to a gravel road kind of behind the airport. So there wasn't a lot of public. There was a couple of farmers that drove up in their ATVs and a couple of guys in their pickups. They stayed a fair amount of distance. There was one guy though. So then the news showed up. The actual local news showed up.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question.
There was this I Seen It guy, right? Who he was a superhero that pulled us out and rescued us and saved our lives and all. Like he was telling a story, man. It was a whopper, and we were just like, whatever. We
let him have it. He saved our lives. Sure.
Hey, yeah, we're so thankful that he, later my friends were all telling us that they were never over near the aircraft at all. They were just hamming it up for the news. It was hilarious. And so some of our notes, like I said, jot down pertinent information to the accident, right? V speeds, what happened, noises, timing, of all, not the engine timing, but the timing of events, like how long before this happened and then this happened, conversation notes that might be important between like the flight instructor. Like I'm like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like I was very clear. I do not have control of the aircraft. I don't know what's going on. This is on you, but let me know if I can do anything. He's like, I've got it. We just gotta, find a place to land and got to get this down. And
Was there any pushback from the feds on that at all? Like, did they look at you and say, are you, did they try to insinuate that you might have been the senior pilot on board, or was it all pretty clear cut?
no, the feds. I want to say that they were great. I've always had the impression that the feds are out trying to take your license and really hose people over, and they really weren't. They were super great, and they were like, "Are you guys okay? Can you
Yeah,
tell us what happened? We're going to do an investigation. If something happened, there may be consequences for that, but we're not here trying to hang somebody. We want to find out what happened to try to make things better."
right.
And that I felt like they were very sincere with that. With that, it is intimidating because they're in suits, they did show up. The FAA was there.
How
Um,
long did it take the FAA to show up?
so they're in Ankeny from Knoxville. So I'm guessing it's probably 40 minutes.
Wow.
But keep in mind they got called by the police officer within a minute after we were down, right?
Yeah.
Kind of the first. So, and that was the first contact that I had, and that was the best knowledge. You know what I mean? I had so many things going on, and so the best knowledge that I had, I'm like, they would be the best resource for me to have him call and try to start sorting stuff out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're like, "Hey, yeah, man, we're going." So they beat feet, man. They came down. And so my notes here is have your photo ID, your driver's license, because everybody asked for that. I had to get all my information to the ambulance driver and the police officer. Your pilot's license, they want all that information. Your medical, they wanted our logbook, and neither one of us had our logbooks with us. And so then you've got a period of time, and I don't want to say it because the rules sometimes change, and I'm not as well versed on that now as I was. But you have some time to produce that.
So they
Engine,
wanted your logbook even though you weren't technically flying?
yeah.
Wow.
And I don't know if that's just because it's on the form, and so they just asked for it. But they certainly wanted his, but they wanted mine too. And I'm like, well, I wasn't any part of that. And so I showed it to them, but they basically just looked and said, yeah, I am who I said I was. And they didn't keep it or really document anything by it or whatever.
Huh. Okay.
But the engine and airframe logs, they were very, because something happened in the gyroplane, and it definitely lost power. And I know what happened, but I don't want to say it because I don't want to describe it incorrectly.
That's
And
fair.
people, you know what I mean? And get organizations all upset about, I said this
No,
happened.
that's okay. All we need to know is that it didn't keep flying, right?
So what I can tell you is aircraft. So we got called. The manufacturer this is in Canada, and they called us the next day, both of us, and they want to know, first of all, we were all right, and they basically wanted us to not talk to anybody, and they were doing their own investigation, find out what happened. And the engine manufacturer, they were kind of the same way. They're like, we don't want you talking to anybody, and don't say anything. And so there's a lot of organizations that they're protecting their interests, right? And so
Right.
I don't necessarily disagree with that, because if you say so, like I said, if I said something inaccurate, a lot of people see that, and then it gets, the telephone game. Then a bunch of inaccurate information gets out there, and it's really hard to dispel those rumors and that sort of thing. So just be careful. And then the aero paperwork was definitely, the FAA wanted to see all that paperwork and talk about all that and everything. So we were all legal.
So how did the interaction? I mean, I know you said with the local news showing up that they had a couple local celebrities, but did they? How did that go? We did a professional development program course with a former board member um, who used to be a police officer, and he had Police officers in the media, they have their strong feelings, and he's just like, you don't talk to the media ever. Um, and for reasons I'm sure you can guess. Um,
I think that's sage advice.
did you guys run into any issues with that, or?
So I'll finish up the story. I know we're running a little long here. But so I've got to go get my daughter at 3 now, and it's a little after 2. So we had flown out of Oskaloosa, which is about a 15-minute flight from Knoxville, something like that. So I've got to fly back to Oskaloosa to get my car to go to Pella to get my daughter, which is, a half hour. So I'm in that 45-minute window. So now I've got the get home itis. I've got things to do.
And you've got to climb into an airplane after having just survived.
So I walk over and I pre-flight the airplane, and I can't tell you how detailed I can tell you how detailed my pre-flight was. I looked at everything.
Wow.
And so my son, I'm like, you wouldn't go with me? He's like, man, there's no way I'm getting another airplane. I'm like, well, the odds are in our favor. There's the chance of me crashing 2 airplanes in the same day is virtually nil. So, and the weather, it was clear to million out. It was a really nice day. So weather was no factor into this whatsoever.
How are your nerves climbing into an airplane, though?
And I wasn't really nervous. I had over 1,000 hours, I'm sure, of instruction time and flight time and everything by that point. It wasn't a factor in that. And I started it, and I'm taxiing, and it's, there's no activity at the airport now. Everything's kind of died down, and everything's, down over at the bottom of the hill, just off the airport grounds, so where the accident was. All the people are congregating there, and there's a few people meandering around the airport just doing other stuff. But so I get in the airplane taxi. I'm pretty much the only one around taxiing out, and I'm taking off. And as soon as I plowed power to take off, that's when I started kind of feeling that, is this a good idea moment? You know what I mean?
Yep.
And well, okay, so V1 rotate. And I mean, it's a 172, but it's still, as I'm rotating, I'm like, okay, we're taking off. Everything's great. Engine's making power. I'm checking all the gauges. I got plenty of fuel. Oil pressure is good. Oil temp's good. And we're flying out. And I flew over the crash site. And that was a really surreal moment. It's like an outer body experience, right? So outside of my body, looking down on the crash site.
Yeah.
And it was really surreal. I can't really describe that feeling, but it was like I was looking at myself while I was down there in the crash, and it was just a really spiritual moment.
Yeah.
It was just a mind blown kind of feeling. And there's still residual smoke coming off the ground. The fire truck is still down there, and it was just, the utilities are there. The ambulance was pulling away. The police car had left now, and there's people are kind of just starting to disperse, and it was just a really surreal moment. So I fly the flight, a completely uneventful flight. Landed in Oskaloosa. It was fine. I was the only one there, and I walked in the FBO to give him the keys. And he said, "How was your flight?"
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like,
which one?
I'm going to have to table this because I got to get my daughter, but I'll let you know that we're okay and the airplane is fine. And well, the rest of it we'll talk about later. And he's like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, go watch the news." And so I get in my van and go pick up my daughter. And while I'm driving to the school, the phone rings, and they said, "Hey, this is KCCI. We saw your Facebook post and saw you on social media, and we want to come and interview you. Where's a good place to meet?"
Now, did you know you knew that it was on social media at this point, right?
I did, but
okay.
Now like the mainstream news is calling me. They have my phone number, and they're calling me, and they want to come and interview me. And like, "Where do we meet?" I'm like, "Well, I'm going to get my daughter and bring her." They're like, "Can we meet you at your house?" I'm like, "Yeah, I guess." Now, this is an important thing to note also. When you're flying, it's always a good idea to file a flight plan. And we had filed a flight plan. That wasn't a factor in this at all. But one thing was the cinematographer called me after my wife had gone to work that morning. And so she didn't have any idea that I was flying. And so she comes home from work and I'm sitting in the yard while KCCI is filming us.
Oh my goodness.
And she's like, "What's going on?" I'm like, I was in a plane crash, and so they're, and it was comical and a little awkward. So
Yeah.
let your loved ones know and your family know if you get a flight that pops up or whatever, go somewhere, send them a text. It's just a courtesy, and you'll thank me later.
Good advice. Good advice.
So you can, and I'll send you the link to it too. But you can Google Red Gyroplane Knoxville, Iowa, and I'm sure the video will still, at least some of the videos will still populate.
Wow.
And you can watch the news from that. So it was quite an experience. But a lot goes on after that you just don't think about at the time.
Yeah. So one of the other details, and I don't want to get into too much of it because I'm not an insurance salesman, and I'm sure you're not either. But how did the whole insurance thing work? Because I think one of the common misconceptions is that the pilot's insurance is going to cover everything for anybody who's riding with them and stuff like that. I mean, certainly they're plan dependent, but was there any insurance issues after the fact?
All of my medical, they called and asked me if I was okay, and they encouraged me to go to a doctor and get checked out if it wasn't. They were super great.
That's awesome.
I refused it. I didn't go to the doctor. Even the next day, I was still a little banged and bruised and stiff and sore, whatever. But I was fine. It's no worse than rough housing with the kids on a Saturday afternoon.
Boy, you got lucky.
And I really, 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 truly blessed. But the insurance was, I think, pretty easy to work with. Now, it was unfortunate. So the pilot and him and his brother built this thing a couple of years prior, and they were grossly underinsured.
Oh,
because
no.
they, when they built it and stuff, they saved a fair amount of money on their monthly premiums. So they decided to go to that smaller amount because they're like, well, if we ding a wing or a propeller blade or something happens, landing gear, we'll have plenty of money to repair the damage. They never thought about a total airframe, failure or an accident that totaled the airframe.
So, any other repercussions of the event? Anything else that you can remember from any of the agencies or media outlets or any of that kind of stuff? Were the comments on social media relatively kind, or?
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to get back to the media a little bit. And your police officer friend that was saying don't talk to the media ever. So they interviewed me and they asked all kinds of questions. Everything's filmed, right? So They probably interviewed me for 40 minutes. It was about 40 minutes that we talked, and it turned into like a 2-minute clip, right? So they condensed 40 minutes of information into that 2 minutes. But then they narrated most of it, right? It wasn't even me speaking. They narrated. So I told them that I was a pilot, and then later we talked about I was retired from the Air National Guard. And so that got condensed into I was an Air National Guard pilot, which was not true. And there was a couple of other inaccuracies. I can't remember off the top of my head now. But so what they reported and how they said it sounded very different than what actually occurred.
Right. Yeah.
So and I don't think it's intentional. You hear the fake news and fake media and all this stuff. Sometimes it's intentional and there's an agenda behind it or whatever, especially when you get into politics and who pays to play for what or whatever. But I think a lot of times the media is they're really busy. They're taking 40 minutes of material and they've got a whole team of people that are trying to condense that in a 2-minute video before it hits the next slot in an hour. And so I really think it's just trying to do the best they can at the pace that they have to operate with what they have to work with, and then disseminating that out and then moving on.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is just an unfortunate part of the trade.
Well, I mean, the story that you told is harrowing. I mean, it's something that doesn't happen to everybody, thankfully. And of course, walking away from it is amazing. And I certainly appreciate you sharing it because, like I said at the beginning, these are things that people put away from their mind because it's not going to happen to me. And, I'm not going to need to know this because I'm going to be okay. It's going to be everyone else. And I think you're proof that it's best to refresh your memory on what to do in the event of an emergency of this sort, especially if you're a regular flyer.
Yeah, and as a CFI, right? So because you're NAFI, I am quite well known to pull engines fairly regularly, and I try to do it, in a safe, responsible manner.
Sure.
But I definitely want to make that impression, and I do it. I don't forewarn my students that I'm going to do it. Right? I want it to be as much of a surprise as I can. One
Yep.
other point I want to point. One other thing that I want to point out, though, this is a little off topic, but it's CFI related. So I learned through this and some other events that have occurred that when I go through with students and have them touch the controls, right? So so engine failure, you go through the procedures or whatever, and they touch the controls, and I'll turn the lights on, and they go through their, the BC Gumps or whatever, and they're going through their pre-landing stuff, and they touch the controls. Physically have them do something, especially when they like lights, and they'll point at the lights, and I said, nope, pull them on, because I found when I had another engine failure with a student, and this was not a planned engine failure. This was we had forgotten to switch the tanks. I was on a hyper, and so the engine failed, and were going through the mental checklist and stuff, but they were just pointing at the stuff. They weren't actually checking it and doing it, right? So they had been taught inadvertently to just touch the things or to verbalize it, but not actually do the things.
Yeah.
And so it's important to actually do the things, because that's what you do in the emergency, is what you trained.
Yeah.
And that's a really important distinction that really kind of surprised me when I saw that. And so it changed a lot. And this has been quite a few years ago, but it's changed a lot about how I teach in the aircraft. So I do want to cover that as well.
Yeah, the human brain is an interesting thing.
Indeed.
Well, Jeff, I appreciate you coming on today. And one of the things I want to give you a moment here to talk about Open Air Flight Club. I don't feel like I did it as much justice as I should have. Can you give me a better description and maybe a quick plug for it?
Yeah, so openairflightclub.com. It's so my history was, solving the problem that, started way back in the early 2000s, is how do we get youth involved in aviation? And with the aging baby boomer population, how do we mentor the younger generation and talk about that? So I started speaking at my kids' schools when they were really young, and talking to teachers, and sometimes parents would approach me, how do I get to be a pilot? And it was just, I dubbed it the 2-hour conversation. All these, those questions just snowball when you answer one, and they think about something, and then they start going from there. And so the book is really centered around the 20 frequently asked questions that you would get from somebody that has an unaided interest in aviation and doesn't know where to get started, or wants to answer some of those questions. And so that was the goal with that. And I think we accomplished it really well. The Minnesota Aviation Hall of Fame thought we accomplished it really well. And so then we go and talk to schools. We've got curriculum that we've based on, and we've got an online course that we work with the AEA to help teachers learn about aviation and incorporating it as a STEM learning platform in their schools. And so as an aviation ambassador, I go to ambassador. I go to aviation events, and kids love to sit in airplanes or play with simulators and talk about airplanes. And I sell T-shirts and little wooden planes, and it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. It sounds like you represent the profession very well. So thank you for all that you do. I mean, getting young people into aviation is Sometimes harder than you'd think it would be. I mean, we all think it's pretty cool, but sometimes it takes a little bit of a nudge to get them involved. So I'm sure that you've made a big difference in a lot of kids' lives. So that's really cool. Um,
Thanks.
yeah. So basically, as we wind this down, for the listeners out there, don't forget that we do have the discount for NAFI membership, Pod 49. Please subscribe, tell your friends, sign up for NAFI at nafinet.org. And on to the next.